Hey everybody, welcome to another installment of Fearless Fridays on Facebook Live. So thank you all for joining us, those of you who are going to be joining us live, or those of you who are going to be watching us at a later time and date. Either way, thank you for watching. So last week we had no Fearless Fridays because I was actually away on vacation, but you might have seen that one of my colleagues had posted a little preview of something that I'm going to touch upon a little bit today, a cool new piece of technology that we will be incorporating into our programs in the summer, but also more in the fall as well. So today's topic is all about what I kind of dub as the Great STEAM debate. And that's namely the difference between STEM versus STEAM. So this is a question that we get a lot when people are kind of asking about what we do and about STEM. A lot of times parents or families have kind of heard about STEM, but still want a little bit of clarification on what that actually means. And I've had parents and families in the past say, well, I've heard about STEM, but I've also heard about STEAM. What's the difference? So for those of you who don't know, STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. And STEAM is when you embed the arts in it. So some people refer to it as STEM, some people refer to it as STEAM. So that would be Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Math. And really, it all depends on how you look at it. Personally, and kind of as a collective group here at STEM Minds, we believe that they aren't different. They're actually the same thing. Whether you choose to call it STEM, whether you choose to call it STEAM, the arts is always there. The arts are always embedded in everything you do, because STEM and STEM fields in themselves are actually quite creative disciplines. I think part of that also comes from the way that you define what STEM learning is. So a lot of times, again, because the word STEM is kind of new buzzwords that's being thrown out there. People have a decent understanding of what it is, but don't necessarily inherently maybe understand what it entails. And I think sometimes when we start labeling these areas as STEM or kind of STEAM, we have a very specific idea on what those disciplines actually look like. So for example, when we talk about STEM, a lot of times people will kind of define it as science, technology, engineering, and math. And we at STEM Minds believe that it's so much more than that. So I think if you start to look at STEM as the way that our world works, and kind of look at it almost as a framework to the way that technology is now being used in our society, and the way that our world is kind of evolving, it just naturally it includes the arts and includes more creative disciplines in there as well. Something that we always tell the kids is that nothing is ever done in isolation. So if you're doing engineering, it's not like every single thing that you ever do in your entire life is only going to be related to engineering specifically as you would traditionally think of it. And the whole idea kind of between the STEM and STEAM debate, and by why I personally think that it should not be a debate, is because they are so interchangeable. And like I said before, STEM and that the kind of way of thinking and the way that you need to approach STEM disciplines is actually very inherently creative. So again, although some people might choose to call it STEM, some people choose to call it STEAM. I think the important takeaway here is that they really aren't that different. It's really shouldn't be a debate because it's really the same thing when you break it down to its core. And that's kind of looking at the way that our world works, looking at the way that technology is now influencing our everyday life, and just really trying to kind of unpack that and understand that in a meaningful way. So some examples, because often, we'll say like, oh yeah, arts is always embedded there, and people kind of, when they traditionally think of robotics and coding and things like that, they won't necessarily think about how it is inherently a very creative field. So coding, for example, part of the reason why I actually I enjoy coding, even though I come from an arts background, is because of that inherent creativity. So when you're trying to speak to a computer, which is really what coding is, you are looking at ways to kind of creatively solve a problem. And a lot of times, especially when you're coding from scratch, that requires you to really think outside the box and really kind of stretch your brain to consider different ways of problem solving and things like that as well. So coding inherently, that process of taking something from nothing and creating something new with it, and just being a language in itself, is typically what's usually considered to be things that are associated with creative disciplines. So although at its at the front, coding seems like something that's very technical, very sciencey, very, very math focused. It is those things, but it's also very creative and also very much related to language and language arts. Another great example is 3D printing. So most of us know that 3D printing is related to 3D design. So not only does 3D printing take technology that is typically used in engineering fields and architectural fields, and fields that you would consider to be more inherently kind of STEM focused, so people who are coming from more like science and math backgrounds. 3D design and 3D printing is just as it sounds, it's design. So that's one of the kind of first examples that we usually show the kids of how STEM and STEAM are actually quite intertwined, and it's really the same thing, because 3D printing technology requires you to create. So it not only allows you to create in very much a similar way that we would have all done when we were younger with either Play-Doh or building blocks. Again, that idea of kind of building something from nothing, using shapes and colors and patterns to make some really, really cool things, but it also brings in that math component and that kind of science component of making sure that your structures are stable, making sure that if you're creating a prototype that it's down to size, that it's scaled properly. So it's really quite a beautiful melding of how what's typically considered to be the science discipline and typically considered to be the arts discipline, and how they can so beautifully come together, and a really powerful example for the kids to really show them that the world doesn't work in isolation this way. You're going to need some of the science, but you're also going to need some of the art to be the most successful you can be in life. One of my personal favorite examples is in app development, web development, and graphic design. Now again, I do come from an arts background, so I might be a little bit biased in that. But similar to 3D design, what I really love about these disciplines is, again, how it shows kids that, especially kids who are like me, who maybe grew up saying, I'm going to be an artist and I'm going to go to art school and all that kind of stuff, that you still can code and you still can do quite technical and quite mathematical things, even if you typically labeled yourself as an arts kid. So app design and web design is really, really based on design principles and really based on principles of user interface and what's visually going to captivate your user so that they will want to use your app or use your website. But it also requires you to understand the coding and understand some of that kind of fundamental background bits that go into websites and creating apps that you as a user don't necessarily think about. However, when you are creating it for someone else, it really, really requires you to have a deep understanding of not only the front-hand user experience, but also the backhand or back-end developer experience. And so I really love those to use with the kids, especially as a good entry point for those who are maybe a little bit more artistically inclined, to show them that it's not as scary as it originally may seem, and if I can do it, then you can do it too. One of our new kind of programs that we have just offered this past spring is the graphic design and web development course, and I really, really love it because, again, it shows them how tech skills and traditional kind of artistic skills can really come together to make something really cool and make something really powerful, but also give kids that fundamental understanding of how this technology and kind of how these disciplines actually do come together in everyday life and in everyday industries. So when we are teaching for graphic design, I'll actually use Photoshop with the kids, and I'll teach them about the tools. I'll teach them about design principles, fundamental design principles that you would learn in university. to give them that really powerful understanding of how this is actually used every single day in industries like web design, in industries like graphic design, in industries like animation, illustration, anything that you can typically consider to be something related to arts. As much as I love painting with paint and drawing with pen and paper, that's just not really necessarily the way that the world is going anymore. And the Apple iPad and Apple Pencil is actually a really good example of how arts and technology are really transforming together and starting to be combined in new and exciting ways. And so part of what we want to do in our programs is help kids really understand that change and not necessarily fear it or shy away from it, like I might have 10 years ago, but really kind of embrace it and understand what it means to utilize both. So graphic design is going to become even cooler in the fall because that fancy piece of technology that my colleague Lahika shared with you last Friday is a giant poster printer, which is my favorite toy now here at STEM Minds because it prints really beautiful posters, and there's a lot that we can do with that, not only as an organization but also with the kids. So part of what we're trying to do is, again, when we're talking about STEM versus STEAM, is not only have the kids understand how to produce really beautiful and really kind of coherent and cohesive pieces of graphic design, whether it be a movie poster or a box art for a video game or a poster for their website, but also showing them how the technology works that would produce the posters that you see in the movie theater, so like the coming soon posters, or produce the posters that you would see on a sidewalk or a billboard. And again, getting them to understand how that kind of final product or how that initial process leads to that final end product. And I think also, you know, from a young person's perspective, having that creation of yours actually physically held in your hand, especially when we're moving to such a digital focus and kind of a paperless world, can also be very powerful for the kids. So again, we're trying to get them to understand not only how to create the art, but then also how to produce it in that way too. So what we're hoping is that in the fall, when we're doing our graphic design and we're doing our web development and we're doing some of these more what you would consider to be traditional STEAM sort of activities, is get them to also understand the kind of hard STEM or the engineering behind it. So really thinking about how does that printer work, and how can I sort of understand the technology itself and how my projects and kind of my creative ideas can combine with it to make some really cool things happen. So we actually just posted a blog earlier today, I believe, about 3 of the coolest ways that we can use 3D printing, which I will post in the links to, because I think, again, that's a great example to show kids of how you can take these technologies and take the same fundamental kind of artistic principles that you would use for 3D printing a little figurine or a house, and use them in, again, new and creative ways. So I guess my kind of takeaway point here is, when you think of STEM and you think of STEAM, don't think of them as separate. Think of STEM and STEAM and that kind of word or label as more of a fundamental understanding of how our world today works, rather than something that is specifically science or specifically engineering or technology or something like that. And really taking a more holistic look at it, because when you break that down and you start to think of creativity not just for the A in arts, but you're thinking of creativity in general, and how creativity is that idea of making something out of nothing, coming up with new ideas, thinking out of the box, then the links between STEM and STEAM and the way that these technologies and these things come together becomes so much more apparent and so much more understandable. And so that's kind of what we're hoping for the kids as well. Other than that, as always, if you have any questions or you would like to join in the conversation of the whole kind of STEM versus STEAM, especially those of you who might be watching who are educators, because I know this is a big thing in education right now, love to hear your 2 2 cents, throw them in the comments, and I'm always happy to keep the dialogue going either through comments or even for another Facebook Live. Next Friday, we will have another Facebook Live. I will have a special guest joining me, I hope, to talk a little bit about higher education and some new and exciting and kind of out-of-the-box thinking for the ways that higher education is going to be addressed and looked at. So I'm very excited about that. And other than that, we are actually only 1 week away from summer camp. So you might have noticed that in the background here, I am upstairs, and that is because downstairs is full of boxes and bins and prep for summer camp happening. We do still have a few spaces available. So if you are watching and you are a parent and you're thinking, summer is only a week away, what am I going to do with my kids? Great camps to kind of introduce them to some of these STEM and STEAM activities and get them to kind of look at some of these new and exciting technologies in a really kind of cool and holistic way, in a fun environment, of course. So I will post the link to the summer camps and the link to the blog in the comment sections below in just a few minutes. And other than that, thank you for joining me for another lovely and sunny Facebook Fearless Fridays on Facebook Live. And we will see you next week. Bye for now.